This happened about 30 years ago, when I was around 14 years old. I'm not a remotely superstitious person, but I've never forgotten about this. I grew up in a small coastal town in northern England, where my dad worked as an estate agent. One summer, to earn some extra money, he paid me and a friend to help clear out an old hotel, which he'd been asked to sell. The place looked super creepy, like something out of a cliched horror film. An old renovated 19th century house converted into a hotel looking out to sea. It had been empty for a year or so, and my dad mainly wanted us to clear the bar area of all the old empties which had just been left to pile up and then seemingly abandoned. The first morning, me, my dad and my friend Rick went in the front door and the vibe just felt off immediately. The decor, old wallpaper and carpets, pictures on the wall, it couldn't have been any creepier. Maybe it was just the silence of such a big empty building that made it feel weird. My dad took us through to the bar area and showed us 2 rooms full of hundreds of empty glass bottles. I guess the owners had filled the recycling bins that were there, but then just continued to throw any further empties on the surrounding concrete floor. It was a huge mess and smelt so bad from all the old stale booze and damp walls. My dad told us to start clearing everything into the skips outside, and then left. As soon as he left, and me and Rick were standing in the total silence, I could feel the dread kicking in, and I could see it on his face too. We walked back through to the bar storeroom, and began throwing the glass bottles into the empty wheel bins, which was a small thrill for 2 teenagers, and before long we'd kind of forgotten about the creepiness of the hotel. After a couple of hours, we stepped out to grab some lunch, and to get some fresh air from the horrible smell in the hotel. We sat outside and finished eating, then walked back to the hotel, through the front door, and locked the door behind us. It seemed even quieter now in the hotel, after being outside and hearing all the noises from the street. My heart started to beat a little faster, and we both just kind of looked at each other. I could tell we both felt the same fear, without actually saying anything. We hadn't even mentioned exploring the hotel, as if neither of us wanted to admit to being scared out loud. Right in front of where we were standing was a staircase for guests to go up to the bedrooms, and then the bar area was to the right of the stairs, where we had spent the morning. "Are we going to check it out?" I asked. We walked a couple of steps to the bottom of the staircase, my heart still proceeding to beat faster. Without saying much, we both started to walk up the stairs slowly. There were no working lights upstairs, and when we got to the top landing, we could just see a long dark hallway with bedroom doors either side. It was pitch black at the other end, so you couldn't really tell how long the hallway was, but I could see maybe about 4 or 5 rooms either side. There was no way I was about to walk all the way down the hallway into the dark, so we went to the first door and tried the handle, but the door was locked and wouldn't open, which seemed strange if the building was to be sold. With my adrenaline pumping, I turned round with Rick and tried the handle of the door opposite. It clicked open and we looked at each other, eyes wide open. We pushed the door open and walked in. The room looked pretty much empty. There was a base of a bed with no mattress, and the same creepy old wallpaper that was in the rest of the hotel. The rooms weren't huge, but it was so dark that you could barely see in front of you. I scanned around to see the far corner of the room, waiting to see if my eyes would readjust to the dark, but I couldn't see much of anything. I looked at Rick, and he was squinting his eyes at the far corner of the room too. We must have felt something at the same time, or maybe just a palpable mounting fear, because we suddenly, at exactly the same time, just bolted out the room, down the stairs, and straight out the main door to the street outside. Standing there panting, and trying to get some composure, I asked Rick if he'd seen something. "No, but it felt really off. There's no way I'm going back up there," he replied. We agreed that my dad would likely be a bit pissed if we just gave up now. Not to mention a bit embarrassing, being scared when nothing actually had happened that we could explain. And aside from that, more than anything, We really wanted to make some cash. After a few minutes, the fear subsided, and we started to have a bit of a laugh about the whole thing, trying to convince ourselves that we were just being dumb. We walked back into the hotel, past the staircase, and back into the bar storeroom. We got back to work, making steady progress, when all of a sudden there was a massive thud from upstairs above us. It almost seemed to shake the walls for a split second. We just stared at each other in total horror, wide-eyed, not knowing what to do or say. Then, clear as anything, we heard loud thudding footsteps running down the upstairs hallway towards the staircase. I could not believe what I was hearing, but there was no way that that was just us being nervous or imagining things. As we both turned and bolted for the door back into the main bar area, dropping the bottles we were holding, the footsteps from upstairs just stopped. We ran through the bar, past the staircase, and out the main door again. I think we were both too scared in the moment to look up the staircase as we ran past, but that was enough for both of us. We were done. We locked the front door, and I took the keys back to my dad. He pretty much just laughed at us and rolled his eyes, but seeing as we'd actually managed to clear a fair bit of the mess, he gave us a few quid for our efforts. For a few years after, me and Rick would talk about that day often, trying to work out what had been going on. The hotel was sold a few months later, and was actually demolished to build student flats a few years after that. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a skeptical person generally, and not in the slightest bit superstitious. But to this day, I don't think I've felt that kind of fear again. The hotel was nothing fancy, just a place to rest for the night during a long road trip to visit a friend for her 30th birthday. I'd been driving for hours, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a comfortable bed. The room was average, and I decided to take a quick shower before lying down for some much-needed sleep. As the warm water cascaded over me, I could hear muffled noises through the bathroom wall. It was typical in a hotel. You could hear people in the neighbouring rooms now and then. I paid no mind, and quickly rinsed off the exhaustion of the road. Freshly showered and in my pyjamas, I tucked myself into bed, ready to drift into a peaceful sleep. The noises continued, but had grown fainter. I figured it was the TV in the next room, and hoped the guest would turn it off soon. I was just on the cusp of sleep when a sudden loud bang from the other side of the wall jolted me awake. My eyes shot open, and I listened intently, but the room was eerily silent. I figured it was just some inconsiderate guest in the neighbouring room. Annoyed, I closed my eyes, hoping to fall back asleep. But then it happened again. Another bang, just as loud as before. My irritation turned to curiosity, and I decided to investigate. I slipped on my slippers and opened the door to my room. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could see the door next to mine. It was clear that it wasn't a hotel room. Instead, it was a maintenance cupboard. A soft light shone from beneath the door, casting a feeble glow on the corridor floor. Puzzled, I returned to my room, questioning my exhaustion. I looked around, trying to figure the source of the noise. The muffled sounds seemed to be coming from the bathroom. Nervously, I approached the bathroom and realized that there was a tiny gap between the edge of the mirror and the wall. I couldn't resist the urge to look closer at the mirror, and realized that it could pop out. With a deep breath, I gently pried it from the wall, revealing a hidden space behind it. My heart raced as I peered into the small compartment. To my horror, I recognized what looked like small cameras, taped into the gap in the mirror. My mind reeled with fear and the realization that someone had been watching me. I quickly put the mirror back in place, feeling a sense of violation and disgust. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. With shaky hands, I gathered my belongings and rushed down to the hotel reception. I was angry and demanded to speak to the manager. The hotel staff gasped as I told them about the mirror and cameras, and I insisted that they show me inside the cupboard next door to my room. The hotel manager led me down the corridor to the maintenance cupboard. The overhead light was on, revealing a collection of cleaning supplies. Frustrated and alarmed, I called the local police while still in the hotel lobby. They assured me that an officer would arrive shortly to investigate the situation. The police officer arrived promptly, and together we searched the maintenance cupboard. Among the cleaning supplies, we discovered a hidden hard drive. It was cleverly concealed behind the rows of cleaning chemicals. I shuddered as I realized that this device might contain videos or images of me that had been captured in my hotel room. It was evidence of a crime, a voyeuristic violation of my privacy, and who knows how many others. The police reviewed the contents of the hard drive and traced it back to a hotel employee who had been secretly recording guests. He was arrested and faced serious charges. I left the hotel with a newfound sense of vigilance and paranoia, knowing that my most intimate moments had been invaded by some total creep's prying eyes. It was a night that would forever haunt my thoughts, and I couldn't help but wonder how many other unsuspecting guests had been unknowingly watched in their moments of vulnerability. Working on the oil rigs off the coast of Aberdeen can be a grueling experience. The isolation, the ceaseless howling of the wind, and the endless stretch of the North Sea horizon can take a toll on even the toughest of us. When my weekend leave came around, I was keen to escape to the relative comforts of civilization. That's how I found myself checking into the ancient, remote hotel that would become the setting of one of the creepiest experiences of my life. The hotel was, in a word, odd. It stood alone in the countryside, its faded Victorian grandeur now just a distant memory. On the day I arrived, I was greeted by grey clouds and a sense of foreboding. I had never seen a place so ancient and eerie, but it was the only option for miles that weekend. Walking down the dimly lit corridor, I noticed an older lady struggling with her luggage. She seemed to be the only other guest, and I couldn't ignore her plight. Offering a hand, I helped her carry the bags to her room. She mumbled a quiet thank you and something about the stormy night. My room was a throwback to a bygone era. The bed was enormous, but while it looked incredibly inviting, I couldn't help but notice how uncomfortable it felt. Lying there, I was struck by the howling wind outside, an eerie accompaniment to my restless night. My sleep was interrupted by a muffled, distant sound of the woman next door, talking loudly. The thick walls of the hotel seemed to muffle the words, but I could tell she was agitated. Unable to find a comfortable position and plagued by the bizarre conversation filtering through the walls, I managed only fitful dozes. When I finally woke up, I was shocked to find myself feeling more refreshed than I could ever remember. The comfort of the enormous bed didn't seem to match my discomfort during the night. Still, I shook it off and decided to start my day. I headed to the bathroom, eager to wash off the remnants of the strange night. As I looked into the mirror, I noticed that there were red scratches on the back of my neck and legs. They looked angry, as though someone had clawed at my skin. I tried to remember scratching myself during the night, but I couldn't recall any such thing. Perplexed and a little disturbed, I went downstairs to the dining area for breakfast. A polite waitress greeted me and asked if I'd slept well. I replied, perhaps a bit too casually, that I'd slept great despite the weather and the faint late-night chatter from the neighbouring room. She stared at me for a moment, looking almost embarrassed, before explaining that I had been the only guest in the hotel last night. My blood ran cold as I tried to wrap my head around what she was saying. I argued that it couldn't be. I had clearly seen and helped the elderly woman to her room. The waitress repeated that there was nobody else on the floor, and no other rooms were occupied. I left the dining room in a daze, unsure of what to think. I couldn't stop thinking of the vivid memory of helping that woman, and was starting to question my sanity. As I checked out of the hotel, I felt an odd mixture of relief and confusion. The cold, remote inn was finally in my rear-view mirror, and I was headed into Aberdeen to spend the rest of the weekend with friends. I shared my bizarre experience with my friends, convinced they would reassure me that I had encountered an eccentric, reclusive guest. However, their response was anything but reassuring. They laughed and said that the locals avoid that hotel like the plague. It had a reputation for being incredibly creepy, and even the bravest of them wouldn't dare spend the night there. I'm not superstitious by nature, and I'm generally a rational person, but I couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for what I experienced that night. The old hotel held its secrets closely, and I was left to wonder who my mysterious neighbour could have been.